Welcome back to an unexpected art lesson. Today we are continuing our deep dive into Ukiyo-e, the art of Japanese woodblock printing. Quick segue before we talk about the art, because between the last recording and this recording, I went to the Toledo Art Museum and actually got to see a couple of woodblock prints, including Picturesque View of Famous Bridges by Hokusai.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous, as well as Grand Canyon from the series The United States by Hiroshi Yoshida. Because there is modern Japanese woodblock prints of American scenery. And I just thought that was very cool, as well as, what were some of the others? Apologies ahead of time if I mispronounce any of these. Sawada Shojori as Hayashi Bohei from Creative Prints Collection of Portraits by Shunsen, which appears to be a samurai. Yeah, the Toledo Art Museum is really impressive. The samurai Tomimori Sukumon. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing these. And Search Party, attributed to Yoshitoshi. Which, that one has the more intricate design and detail that we saw with Kuniyoshi.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just looking at some of these mentioned on the Toledo site. That is fascinating and very much kind of the prime examples of ukiyo-e that you can see today. And again, one of the perks of these reproducible art is a lot of times they are able to survive up until, well, more recent times as well.
I was so excited to see those, and also all the other pieces that they had there. They had some furniture, tall portraits. They had Monet's water lilies.
Ooh, that is one of my favorites of Monet.
Yeah, I had to take a picture because it's my mom's favorite.
Ah, very cool.
This is why we go to art museums. You never know what you're going to find. I went with a friend, had no idea what to expect. Holy cow, did I get blown away. Did I take several pictures for things that I want to talk about in the future on this show? Absolutely.
Excellent.
I will be including the pictures that I took on our social media around when this episode comes out for our podcast listeners and our radio listeners to check out when you're not driving.
Yes, we have now been moved to the radio world as well. There is no escape. The art will be everywhere.
Everywhere. Just wait until you can hold the information in your hands, because books are going to happen. Getting back on track, though, otherwise we could spend a whole season talking about Ukiyo-e, I feel like. But let's talk about the gaming connections and how this art style has influenced the world of video games.
Happily, the two main focuses that I've found that are great for referencing ukiyo-e and kind of how it's been adapted for a medium that is not necessarily always static. One would be, of course, Okami. I seriously think that if any gamer who has heard of that and has not realized we'd include that, really, dudes?
I've seen part of the reveal trailer, and just from the first time I saw the art style, it's absolutely 100% without a doubt very much inspired. It's very uniquely stylized with the art, and I absolutely love that in video games when they pick a certain style that is a little different than what other people might do and they stick to it and they lean into it. Love it. Another great example of that is more of a movie, but the Into the Spider-Verse movie.
Ooh.
Where they matched a lot of the traditional comic book design in the movie, and I absolutely love it. And I think you could probably argue tangentially that there's probably some influence that came from ukiyo-e, since ukiyo-e influenced manga, which has probably had some influence on comic books at some point down the line. There's no way it couldn't have. Artists steal from everything.
Hey, if it ain't nailed down or on fire, free game. And even then, with enough prying or a bucket of water, still free game.
Yeah. You just had to get a little more creative with those things.
The other interesting use of ukiyo-e in terms of video game is a medium that they were able to actually create some more still moments using either specialty moves or even their victory poses would be Street Fighter 6 and the New Wave, which, again, very subtle nod to Hokusai there.
Yeah, especially with the dynamic motions and the action scenes. Very much so.
Oh yeah. The use of mixing both street art and ukiyo-e into Street Fighter 6 is reflected a lot in either the character design, such as Ryu with his gi and headband, and how that fabric texture is very reminiscent of how printed textiles would look in that time. Of course, obviously E Honda with the sumo technique and those splash patterns that reference water in traditional prints. The impact frames and the motion lines in his special moves, these are all things that are heavily influenced by ukiyo-e.
And there have been countless games since that are influenced by what Street Fighter did. It's basically its own genre. I am fully aware that I don't know which game actually started the genre, and probably very much depends on who you ask, but that influence has definitely spread.
Interestingly enough, I can answer that. It would be the original Street Fighter. It was one of the first stand-up arcade games that did have player versus player combat, and I believe Ryu and Sagat were some of the original characters as well.
Exciting.
The other major reference I want to make on Street Fighter 2 would be how, even through the ukiyo-e style, they actually did also place nods to street art within the game as well, with the character Kimberly. Merges ninja scroll imagery with the contemporary graffiti techniques. The spray cans and ninja tools kind of create these really fantastic ink splash effects that are almost superimposed onto the scene. A lot of her move animation transitioned between traditional brush strokes and spray paint, which again, kind of this neat amalgamation of style. And it does kind of show how ukiyo-e can take on these street art aesthetics.
Absolutely. There was actually a piece in the Toledo Museum in the same little wing that they had most of the ukiyo-e prints. The Hokusai and the Grand Canyon one were in different wings, but the other three were in the same wing as one. I didn't get a picture of it, but it wasn't made in the woodblock print style. Like, it wasn't made that way, but absolutely was painted and drawn in a way to reference that style while also containing elements of street art. I wish I had taken a picture of it. I should have. I regret it.
Well, still, the description is very cool.
Yeah, and it's a good example of how well those two art styles fit together.
And well, Street Fighter 6 does show the idea of blending these two styles together. Okami takes the very classic approach to the ukiyo-e aesthetics. One of the primary functions, or I guess mechanics of the game, would be the celestial brush. The mechanic literally turns the player into an ukiyo-e artist. Brush strokes mirror the precise line work that you do see in a lot of traditional woodblock. This can also create environmental effects that are showing that same texture of handmade paper and ink. And even through the color palettes, it directly references classical prints.
Exactly. You could very easily make ukiyo-e from the visuals of that game. And just seeing the first still of the character, I want to play this game just because it is that kind of pretty.
It is fantastic. I had played it first when it came out. I believe it was GameCube, PS2, and I just recently played the PS4 version, which is Shiny.
There's something almost comforting about the style. I don't know another way to phrase it, but something about that style. It feels not quite like a fairy tale, but something like that. Almost like a fairy tale that's not from where you and I grew up. Which, for our listeners, just FYI, those are two very different areas.
Yeah, we're not quite sure which planet I started on, but I ended up here.
I'm from Redacted. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It entirely depends on who you ask.
Some of the other kind of really interesting uses of Ukiyo-e in Okami as well is it's not just the mechanics, but as Brianna stated, the entire environment, the storytelling, it all revolves around the use of Ukiyo-e imagery. The landscapes themselves have these beautiful traditional compositions using formal Ukiyo-e techniques. The weather effects are very reminiscent of how Hiroshige's atmospheric prints would look, especially some of his views atop the fire towers. Obviously, the character designs, they draw heavily from classical Japanese mythology, so you can see the references through the print from the characters found in various prints, except for the samurai cats or cats making weird shapes. That's on their own.
That needs to be in a game now, though, because that would do so well. Can you imagine? Samurai cats in the Ukiyo-e style? Hey artists. Hey game developers. That's a fun idea, you should do it.
Search your feelings.
You can almost feel the texture of the paper just looking at it, as opposed to Street Fighter, where it has the dynamics, the motion, the action and fluidity, but it doesn't have that same texture to it.
Yeah, I think that kind of with Street Fighter, it's definitely got the amalgamation of the street art and Ukiyo-e, while Okami takes the purest route.
Yeah, and the approach absolutely fits for each game.
Oh, totally agree.
Street Fighter and Okami style. I would be interested to see that for like a specific arena. Like have a specific arena where it's like that, but I don't think it would work well for the entire game.
Oh yeah. There would definitely be something lost in the kind of more still graceful take Okami has versus the higher energy of Street Fighter.
It would completely change the dynamic. That's why I don't think it would work for the entire game. But it would be cool as like a little Easter egg to have like there's just this one place where if you click on that and you go to fight or like a certain mode where it fits that style and maybe it's slower, more fluid. I don't know, that could be fun.
Oh yeah.
Just a little nod for those of us who know about Ukiyo-e.
I wouldn't be shocked if that happened because Street Fighter 6 is still getting random new things, so.
Hey, developers. Because obviously they're listening to our show.
Fools! We now have you.
So, what are some other games? I know those two are the best examples, but I know it's made its way into other games and other styles. One thing that I think of is possibly is The Wolf Among Us and some of the Telltale games.
Ooh.
Actually, now that I think about it, the art style somewhat reminiscent of, I mean, I might be a little off on this, but Borderlands.
I'll allow it. The style that's used in Borderlands and The Wolf Among Us and the other Telltales, it's known as cell shading, but I agree. It definitely does use those very vivid color pops to kind of do the same style that Ukiyo-e would be. Yeah, same thing with cell shading, though, is the movement does feel very reminiscent of how a block painting would kind of portray the same actions as well.
Yeah, specifically with the specific style that Gearbox used for the Borderlands games, Which I do have a fun story about that, because in the Tales from the Borderlands, I used to go to a video game meetup thing at a coffee shop that was in the same building as Gearbox, so some of the Gearbox devs would go to it. And I overheard the story of when they were working on the Telltale game Tales from the Borderlands. There's one scene, it was described that as this character runs by, he's supposed to like flip off the computers, like turn them off. It's not how the animators understood it. So the character ran by and made a weird gesture at the computers. And I don't know if they decided to keep it, but part of me kind of hopes they decided to keep it because that's funny.
Anyone who works in IT agrees.
Also, it's very on brand for that game, I feel.
The mentality of your average IT person. So yeah, I think there's a few people who work in IT that I would probably sympathize with the Borderlands, or at least get along better there. Some of the other games that kind of do have smaller nods to Ukiyo-e would be, of course, Ghost of Tsushima, the dramatic weather effects, and the photo mode, of course. Kind of not directly influencing, but still is a neat little nod, is the game Persona 5. The menu transitions and their all-out attack animations are very Ukiyo-e themed, especially kind of the still frames at the end. And finally, and obviously, Final Fantasy's character poses and summon animations, those are very sourced from the idea of Ukiyo-e and its take on mythological events.
Never thought about it that way, but that does make sense. I have limited knowledge of those games, but I've seen art and references, and I exist on the internet, and I have friends that are obsessed with those.
One of the ways it has referenced other mediums, so of course the use of it in video games, and kind of some very subtle nods at the start of street art. The other kind of point where the influences do extend, of course, is in street culture with skateboard deck designs, fashion and graphics, various ways to illustrate things. Festival posters, something that usually relies on a much smaller amount of space to present a very visual piece of art, which again is a great nod to how Ukiyo-e uses the exact same way to reproduce its art to make something unique and noticeable and easily located anywhere. So throwing up a festival poster is kind of a neat nod to how Ukiyo-e did the same thing back in the time.
Yeah, the purpose of festival posters, they're meant to draw the attention of people who would be interested in the festival and give them the information that they need, whether it's for promotion or something that you keep for memorabilia.
Exactly. Since we just briefly touched on street art, there is, of course, several street artists that would be notable for using the same style as well. First one would be Miss Van. She is a French-Spanish artist known for incorporating the use of flowing lines and the feminine elegance of, and now I'm going to play the white guy who may not pronounce this correctly card, Bijin Ga, which is beautiful women prints. Very familiar use of soft color palettes, similar later period Ukiyo-e works. The idea that, again, with the exception of Cat Samurai, other Ukiyo-e prints create these characters with an illusion of these mysterious narrative qualities, and her murals often feature women with stylized features and very symbolic elements.
Yeah, looking at the couple pieces on her Wikipedia page, it's very simple in some ways, but the details, especially the boqueria that you can see in Barcelona, the dress the character's wearing is very simple. It's a very soft green, but the face, the eyes are very narrow, the lips are pursed, and the detail in the hair, in particular, the way the light shines off of it, it looks almost soft to the touch. It looks like it is meant to feel more realistic than the rest of the design, but it fits within the design.
Her art style definitely stuck out to me too, just because it does go against a lot of the traditional art worldview, but at the same time it's still very unique, very defined. The other thing definitely I noted with Miss Fan after doing some additional research, her work actually has provoked a negative reaction from some feminist groups due to the portrayal of women in her graffiti. Although she does take this criticism, her reasoning actually I thought was kind of, well, awesome. Her response to this is painting on walls is a way to show that she was boycotting the conventional art world.
Makes sense.
If you're going to challenge the art world, paint on the streets.
Exactly. It is nice to see street art of women that doesn't feel like it's overly sexualizing women. Painting them as symbols of beauty, these are more unique. They've got more personality. They're sassy. They're kind of silly. I like it.
That's actually a really cool take on that.
I can see where the potential for negative reactions can come from, especially considering the messaging of the group in question and whether the art fits with that or not. But also, unless she's part of the group and doing art for that group, then it doesn't have to fit their messaging.
I concur. The fact is that she's doing street art for herself. That, I think, is kind of the best responses. She's not a fan of the conventional art scene, which, ironically enough, now that she has proven her point, she's gotten her own work into private galleries, which, hey, that is awesome.
Very awesome, because start changing what the scene looks like. Start spreading your influence so art galleries are open to allowing in more art that tells stories that are outside of what's traditional and that don't just feature skinny, perfect women, but women who are a little chubby.
I like that. Again, wonderful take.
Who are some others?
One of the other artists is Onek from Japan. This individual directly references Ukiyo-e in her pinup-styled street art. For her, she does combine more traditional Japanese aesthetics with contemporary urban design. Her bold outlines is very reminiscent of Kuniyoshi I saw, and her flat colors, of course, are another great take of how those traditional woodblock printing techniques would work. And much like Miss Van, she does create her own modern bijin ja that speaks to contemporary female identity.
Yeah, redefining beauty in a way.
Said much smarter than I just did.
Well, I do have a bit of a different viewpoint on that particular topic. It does mean a lot as a woman to see images that look closer to what I look like, or art or characters that more resemble me as being depicted as beautiful, and I'd say this is someone who is white and blonde. That is pretty common, but just in general, having different examples of this is beautiful, that are outside of what traditional society says is beautiful and displayed in ways that are different and interesting and that don't fit the typical aesthetic of beauty. I think Pixar actually does a pretty good job of that, as well as having characters who have at least one part of their appearance that does not fit traditional beauty standards.
Yeah, that is said much more eloquently than I could have, because I just went, yeah, art cool.
Art is cool. I do very much like her style looking at the piece displayed on the Urban Nation website with the woman looking over her shoulder with a little... I think it's supposed to be a flower on her hand, but I'm just thinking of those little funny looking like slugs or caterpillars. She's just got a weird little guy on her hand.
I'm going to say it's a slug caterpillar just because that means she's taking it for a walk.
She's just got a little friend. She picked up a little friend. Now he's just gonna hang out on her shoulder. Also, I feel like she's staring at me. The detail in the hair is absolutely gorgeous with the line work and the layers of the lighter versus darker colors, and the way you could see how the hair flows and curls, versus you pointed out with her skin there are highlights and lowlights, but a lot of it does fit with how the traditional prince would have looked.
If you scroll down and review her biography, it could actually be a little caterpillar friend. Of course, Anik uses classic pinup motifs with modern elements, although she did grow up isolated on the island of Kyushu, which is far away from, Tokyo. The idea that it looks like some of it is more of her work is more influenced by cultural customs of life in the Japanese countryside, as opposed to a lot of the contemporary ukiyo-e of the traditional ukiyo-e of being balanced more around towns.
I like when people take a thing that people are familiar with and go decide, you know what, I'm gonna do something just a little bit different.
I'll make friends with a furry caterpillar thing.
It's a furry spotted caterpillar thing. And it looks like there might be two because it's got antennas on both ends. I do think it probably is meant to be some kind of a flower, but in my mind it is now a caterpillar. That's the lovely thing about art, is you can interpret it to be whatever you need it to be or whatever you want it to be.
That is the best way to always look at the art world, is not by the interpretation of others, but how it makes you see things. Because anybody who bases their view of art based off of how I can analyze Street Fighter, we're all in trouble.
You've been listening to An Unexpected Art Lesson featuring Brianna Jean and Watson, as well as the music of Rick the Whitebird. Stay tuned next time to learn more about the art of Japanese woodblock printing. If you like what we're doing, you can follow us on social media and join the conversation over at An Unexpected Art Lesson on Threads, Blue Sky, and Substack. And you can also support us over on Patreon. Get early access to episodes and other fun things at patreon.com/anunexpectedartlesson.